My mother sliced through my daughter's prom dress with kitchen scissors, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction as she whispered, "Now she'll learn her place." The entire family watched in horror as 18 months of planning crumbled to the floor in shredded silk. But what my mother didn't know was that my husband James had direct access to Pentagon databases, and her decades of secrets were about to become front-page news.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The manila envelope arrived at 3:17 a.m., slipped under our front door like a death sentence. I found it when I stumbled to the kitchen for water, unable to sleep after another one of my mother Vivian's manipulative phone calls about Coral's upcoming prom. The envelope bore no return address, just my name, Shelby Knox, written in block letters that looked vaguely familiar. Inside were copies of financial documents that made my blood run cold, bank statements from accounts I'd never seen before, Social Security fraud documentation, Medicare billing irregularities spanning 15 years, and at the bottom of the stack, a handwritten note that stopped my heart. "Your mother has been stealing veteran disability benefits using your deceased father's identity. She's collected over $180,000 in fraudulent payments. Thought you should know before she destroys your daughter like she destroyed you, a friend in the system." My hands shook as I spread the documents across our granite kitchen island. Each page revealed another layer of Vivian's deception. She'd been filing false claims with the Department of Veterans Affairs, claiming my father Randall, who died 5 years ago from a heart attack, was still alive and suffering from PTSD-related disabilities. The monthly payments had been deposited into a secret account she'd opened using his Social Security number and her forged signature as his caregiver. But it was worse than simple fraud. The documents showed she'd been using this money to fund her lifestyle of control and manipulation. Payments to private investigators who'd been following me for months, documenting my daily routines and friendships. Receipts for expensive gifts she'd given to Coral's teachers and school administrators, buying influence and information about my daughter's activities. Even bribes to the country club staff to ensure she was notified whenever I made reservations or attended events without her. As I read deeper into the financial records, a pattern emerged that made me nauseous. Every time I'd tried to assert independence from Vivian's control over the past 2 years, mysterious problems had appeared in my life. When I'd enrolled in graduate school, my financial aid had been mysteriously delayed. Now I saw payments to a clerk in the admissions office. When I'd started dating James before our marriage, my car had been vandalized repeatedly. Here were receipts for payments to local troublemakers. When I'd tried to plan Coral's Sweet 16 party without Vivian's input, the venue had suddenly claimed they'd lost our deposit, and here was proof she'd paid them to lie. The scope of her surveillance and manipulation was breathtaking. She had files on every friend I'd made, every job I'd applied for, every decision I'd tried to make independently. She'd been systematically destroying my attempts at autonomy for years, using stolen military funds to finance her campaign of control. At the bottom of the stack was a folder labeled Coral, Future Planning. My 17-year-old daughter's entire life had been mapped out by her grandmother without my knowledge. College applications to schools Vivian had chosen, scholarship essays that had been ghostwritten by professionals she'd hired, even a pre-selected list of appropriate boys from wealthy families that she wanted Coral to date. The level of control she was planning to extend into my daughter's adult life was terrifying. But the most damning document was a letter Vivian had written to herself, dated just 3 weeks ago. In her own handwriting, she'd outlined her strategy for reasserting complete control over both Coral and me. The letter detailed her plan to sabotage Coral's prom, not just the dress, but the entire experience, as a way to demonstrate that any attempt at independence would result in public humiliation and family shame. "Shelby has been getting too confident lately," the letter read in Vivian's distinctive script. "She thinks she can make decisions about Coral's future without consulting me. The prom situation will remind both of them who really controls this family. Once Coral understands that her mother can't protect her from my reach, she'll come back to following my guidance willingly." The letter went on to describe her detailed plan. She would offer to help with last-minute alterations to Coral's prom dress, then deliberately ruin it beyond repair. She'd already arranged for the backup dress shops to be unavailable through bribes and false bookings. She'd even paid Coral's date's mother to encourage him to break up with her at the last minute, ensuring maximum emotional devastation. This wasn't just cruelty, it was psychological warfare designed to break my daughter's spirit and force our family back under Vivian's complete control. As I sat in our darkened kitchen at 4 a.m., surrounded by evidence of my mother's systematic destruction of our lives, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. For 38 years, I'd accepted Vivian's manipulation as the price of family peace. I'd rationalized her interference as overprotective love. I'd convinced myself that her need for control came from a place of caring, even when it felt suffocating. But this wasn't love. This was something much darker, a deliberate campaign to ensure that neither my daughter nor I would ever be free to make our own choices, build our own relationships, or create our own happiness. She'd been stealing from veterans who'd served our country, using that money to destroy her own family's independence. I thought about James upstairs, sleeping peacefully after a long day at the Pentagon, where he served as Chief of Strategic Operations. My husband had access to resources and connections that could expose Vivian's crimes in ways that would ensure justice wasn't just served. It would be devastating and permanent. But more than that, he had the moral authority that came from actually serving his country, unlike my mother, who was stealing from those who'd sacrificed for our freedom. As the first light of dawn began creeping through our kitchen windows, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront Vivian directly or try to reason with her. Those approaches had failed for decades. Instead, I was going to let her execute her plan to destroy Coral's prom, and when she did, James would make the kind of phone call that would ensure she never manipulated anyone ever again. The manila envelope had given me the ammunition I needed. Now I just had to wait for Vivian to provide the trigger that would justify bringing the full weight of military justice down on her stolen valor and systematic fraud. She wanted to play games with my family's happiness. She was about to discover what happened when you commit federal crimes against the very people whose rights my husband had sworn to protect. The phone call came at 7:23 p.m., 3 days after I'd discovered the manila envelope. Coral was upstairs doing homework, and James was reviewing classified briefings in his study when my phone buzzed with Vivian's contact. I almost ignored it. Her daily check-ins had become increasingly invasive as prom approached, but something made me answer. "Shelby, darling, I hope you're not too busy." Vivian's voice dripped with false sweetness. "I wanted to discuss the final details for Coral's special day." I stepped into the laundry room and quietly activated the recording app James had installed on my phone months ago. As Chief of Strategic Operations, he taught me that documentation was everything when dealing with hostile actors. I hadn't realized how prophetic that advice would be regarding my own mother. "What details, Mom?" I kept my voice neutral, even as my pulse quickened. "Well, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding the dress fitting. You know how important it is that everything is perfect, and I'm concerned that the seamstress you chose might not understand the family standards." The family standards, code for Vivian's impossible expectations that had controlled every aspect of my life since childhood. But now, armed with knowledge of her true nature, I heard something different in her tone, the calculated precision of someone executing a long-planned strategy. "Mrs. Chen has been a seamstress for 20 years, Mom. She's perfectly qualified." "Oh, I'm sure she's adequate for most people," Vivian replied, and I could practically hear her dismissive smile through the phone. "But this is Coral's prom. This is about more than just a dress. It's about her introduction to adult society, about making the right impression on the right families. One small mistake could affect her social standing for years." I gripped the phone tighter, remembering the documents that proved she'd already sabotaged Coral's social life in dozens of ways. "What are you suggesting?" "I think it would be best if I handled the final alterations myself. I could pick up the dress tomorrow and take it to Helena Morrison. You remember Helena from the country club? She does all the work for the senator's wife. Much more appropriate for our family's position." Helena Morrison. I knew that name from the financial documents.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Vivian had paid her $3,000 just last month for unspecified consultation services. Now I understood what that consultation had been about. That's very generous, but Mrs. Chen already has all of Coral's measurements and Shelby. Vivian's voice cut through my protest with the sharp authority she'd used to control me my entire life. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Coral deserves the best, and as her grandmother, I have both the resources and the responsibility to ensure she gets it. The recording app captured every word as Vivian outlined her plan with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. She would pick up the dress at 2 p.m. tomorrow, claiming to be taking it for professional pressing. She'd return it the evening before prom, giving us no time to fix any problems that might arise. Besides, she continued, her voice taking on a tone of manufactured concern, I heard some troubling news about Marcus Green today. My blood chilled. Marcus was Coral's prom date, a sweet, intelligent boy from a military family who treated my daughter with genuine respect and kindness. More importantly, he was someone Coral had chosen herself, without Vivian's input or approval. What about Marcus? Well, Patricia Green called me this afternoon. Apparently, Marcus has been having second thoughts about prom. Something about feeling pressured into asking Coral when he'd rather focus on his upcoming military academy applications. I closed my eyes, knowing exactly what was coming. Patricia Green's name had appeared repeatedly in Vivian's financial records, payments for consultation and cooperation that now made sickening sense. Patricia mentioned that Marcus feels it would be more honest to bow out gracefully rather than pretend enthusiasm he doesn't feel. She asked if I thought Coral would understand if he called tonight to explain his change of heart. You orchestrated this, I said quietly, my voice barely controlled. I beg your pardon? You paid Patricia to convince Marcus to break up with Coral. The pause that followed lasted just long enough for me to hear Vivian's sharp intake of breath. When she spoke again, her voice carried a dangerous edge that I'd learned to fear as a child. Shelby Ann Knox, I will not tolerate these paranoid accusations. I am trying to protect Coral from making mistakes that could affect her entire future. Marcus Green is a nice enough boy, but he's not suitable for our family's standards. His father is enlisted military. They'll never have the social connections Coral needs. Coral doesn't need social connections. She needs to be happy. Happiness is a luxury for people who don't understand how the real world works, Vivian snapped, her careful facade finally cracking. I spent 38 years watching you make naive choices based on feelings rather than strategy. I will not watch Coral repeat your mistakes. The venom in her voice was shocking, but the recording app captured every syllable. She continued her rant, apparently believing she was educating me rather than condemning herself. Do you know what I had to do to fix the mess you made with that community college boy you dated before James? Do you have any idea how much effort it took to ensure the right people knew about James's potential when you started seeing him? Your romantic instincts are terrible, Shelby. Without my guidance, you would have ended up married to some mechanic or construction worker, dragging the family name through the mud. Each word was another piece of evidence that would destroy her when James made his call. She'd been manipulating my relationships for decades, treating my personal life like a chess game where she controlled all the pieces. Coral is 17, Mom. She's not getting married. She's going to prom. Prom is practice for real life. The connections she makes, the impression she creates, these things matter more than her temporary teenage feelings. I'm doing what's best for her future, even if neither of you is mature enough to understand that right now. When I hung up 23 minutes later, the recording contained enough material to destroy Vivian's reputation forever. But more than that, it contained proof of ongoing fraud, manipulation, and conspiracy that would interest federal investigators very much indeed. As I uploaded the file to the secure server James had given me access to, I felt the same cold satisfaction that must have filled military strategists when enemy intelligence fell into their hands. Vivian thought she was executing the perfect plan to reassert control over our family. Instead, she was providing the evidence that would ensure she never controlled anyone ever again. The war between my mother and me didn't begin with Coral's prom dress. It started 18 months earlier, on a Tuesday evening in October, when I made the mistake of believing I could finally stand up to Vivian Knox. We were sitting in the formal dining room of her colonial mansion, the same room where she'd held court over family decisions for as long as I could remember. Crystal chandeliers cast their cold light over the mahogany table where she'd summoned me for what she called an important family discussion. At 36, I was still receiving summons from my mother like a child called to the principal's office. "Shelby, we need to discuss Coral's academic trajectory," Vivian announced, sliding a leather portfolio across the polished table. "I've been reviewing her transcripts and speaking with her guidance counselor, and I'm concerned about her current course selections." I opened the portfolio to find a detailed 4-year plan for Coral's remaining high school years, complete with specific classes, extracurricular activities, and summer programs. Every detail had been researched and organized with military precision. At the bottom was a projected college application timeline that would have impressed Pentagon strategists. "Mom, Coral is only a sophomore. She has time to figure out what interests her." "Time is exactly what she doesn't have," Vivian replied, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. "Do you know how competitive college admissions have become? The families we associate with started planning their children's academic careers in middle school. Coral is already behind." I studied the plan more carefully, noting that every suggested activity aligned with Vivian's vision of appropriate pursuits for a young woman of our family standing. Classical piano instead of the guitar Coral loved, French instead of the Spanish she'd been excited to continue, academic decathlon instead of the creative writing club she'd mentioned wanting to join. "These are all good opportunities," I said carefully, "but shouldn't Coral have some input into her own education?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vivian's smile became razor-sharp, the expression she'd perfected during her years as president of the country club's board of directors, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Input?" she repeated, as if I'd suggested something obscene. "Shelby, darling, 16-year-olds don't have the wisdom or perspective to make decisions that will affect their entire futures. That's why God gave children parents and grandparents." "I'm her parent, Mom. These decisions should be mine and Coral's to make together." The words hung in the air between us like a declaration of war. For 36 years, I'd never directly challenged Vivian's authority over family decisions. I'd learned early that disagreeing with her brought swift and devastating consequences: social isolation, emotional manipulation, and the withdrawal of approval that had shaped my entire sense of self-worth. But something had changed in me since marrying James. Living with a man who treated me as an equal partner, who valued my opinions and supported my independence, had shown me how unhealthy my relationship with my mother truly was. For the first time in my life, I felt strong enough to push back. Vivian's laugh was like crystal breaking. "Oh, sweetheart, I think you're forgetting something important. Who do you think has been funding Coral's private school tuition, her music lessons, her summer camps, the trust fund that will pay for her college education?" The implications hit me like a physical blow. Of course, everything good in Coral's life had come with Vivian's fingerprints on it, ensuring that my daughter's loyalty would belong to her grandmother rather than her mother. "Are you threatening to cut off Coral's education funding if I don't follow your plan?" "I'm simply reminding you of reality," Vivian replied, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "I have resources that allow me to provide opportunities you could never afford on James's government salary. Why would you want to limit Coral's potential out of some misguided desire to assert parental authority? The casual dismissal of James's military service, his dedication to protecting our country, revealed something ugly in Vivian's character that I'd been trained to ignore. She'd never approved of my marriage to a career military officer, considering it a step down from the corporate executives and trust fund inheritors she'd have preferred. James's salary isn't the issue here. The issue is that you're trying to control Coral's life the same way you controlled mine. Vivian's mask slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath her grandmotherly facade. Controlled your life? Shelby, I saved your life. Do you remember what you were like before I stepped in? You were dating that automotive mechanic with the tattoos. You were planning to attend community college instead of pursuing a real education. You were on track to waste every advantage this family had worked generations to build. Maybe those were my choices to make. Your choices were disasters waiting to happen, she snapped. Tommy Archer would have gotten you pregnant before graduation and trapped you in a trailer park existence. Community college would have limited your social connections to working-class families with no influence or resources. I intervened because I love you enough to save you from your own poor judgment. The mention of Tommy Archer hit like a slap. I'd wondered for years why he'd suddenly stopped calling, why he'd avoided me at school, why our relationship had simply evaporated without explanation. Now I understood that Vivian had destroyed it, just like she'd destroyed every other relationship or opportunity that didn't fit her vision for my life. What did you do to Tommy? I had a conversation with his father about realistic expectations for his son's future. I explained that encouraging a relationship with you was unfair to both families, given our different social positions. His father was quite reasonable once he understood the situation. You threatened them? I educated them about appropriate boundaries, just like I'm trying to educate you now about what's best for Coral. Standing in that dining room, surrounded by the symbols of wealth and status that Vivian wielded like weapons, I finally understood the scope of her control over my life. Every major decision, every relationship, every opportunity had been filtered through her judgment and manipulated to serve her vision of what our family should be. But I also realized something else. I wasn't the scared, dependent young woman she'd shaped me to be anymore. I was married to a man who commanded respect at the highest levels of government. I had resources and connections she couldn't intimidate or buy. I'm taking Coral home, I said, standing and smoothing my dress with hands that barely trembled. We'll discuss her education as a family, meaning James, Coral, and me. Shelby. Vivian's voice carried a warning that had controlled me for decades. Don't make me choose between supporting this family and enabling your rebellion. You won't like the choice I make. I met her eyes directly, seeing the woman who had shaped my life through fear and manipulation with perfect clarity for the first time. Maybe it's time for both of us to find out what I'm capable of when I'm not afraid of disappointing you. That was the moment the real war began. The first attack came exactly 1 week after my confrontation with Vivian. I should have expected it. She'd never tolerate defiance without swift retaliation. But the surgical precision of her response caught me completely off guard. I was sitting in Dr. Patricia Seaver's office discussing Coral's academic progress during our scheduled parent-teacher conference when the conversation took an unexpected turn. Dr. Seaver, who had been Coral's guidance counselor for 2 years and had always been supportive of her creative interests, suddenly seemed distant and concerned. Mrs. Knox, I need to address some troubling developments regarding Coral's behavior and academic focus, she began, consulting a file that seemed much thicker than it had been during our last meeting. Several teachers have reported concerning changes in her attitude and performance. My stomach clenched. What kind of changes? Coral's grades have been excellent, and she's never had behavioral issues. That's what makes this so concerning, Dr. Seaver replied, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone delivering bad news. Mr. Harrison reported that Coral has been disruptive during English class, arguing with his interpretations of literary themes, and challenging his authority in front of other students. This made no sense. Coral loved English class and had never been disrespectful to teachers. Can you be more specific about these incidents? According to Mr. Harrison's notes, she's been promoting what he calls inappropriate feminist interpretations of classic literature and encouraging other students to question traditional academic authority. He's concerned that she's been influenced by outside sources that are undermining her respect for educational institutions. The language was telling, clinical, and loaded with implications, designed to make Coral sound like a troublemaker rather than an engaged student with her own opinions. I recognized Vivian's influence in the careful phrasing, the way legitimate intellectual curiosity was being reframed as problematic behavior. Has Coral been given an opportunity to explain her perspective on these discussions? Dr. Seaver shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Knox, I think we need to consider whether Coral might benefit from some additional structure and guidance. There are several excellent academic programs that focus on helping bright students channel their intellectual energy more appropriately. She slid a brochure across her desk. The cover featured perfectly groomed teenagers in blazers, sitting in pristine classrooms with expressions of respectful attention. The Whitmore Academy has an excellent reputation for helping academically gifted students develop proper study habits and social awareness. It might be exactly what Coral needs to get back on track. Whitmore Academy. I'd heard Vivian mention it during country club conversations, a private boarding school that specialized in what they called character development for children from prominent families. Translation: an institution designed to break independent spirits and create compliant, socially acceptable young adults. Dr. Seaver, Coral has never expressed any interest in boarding school. Her grades are excellent, she's involved in appropriate extracurricular activities, and she's happy here. Sometimes parents are too close to the situation to see developing problems objectively, she replied, her tone becoming more clinical. The teachers who interact with Coral daily are noticing patterns that suggest she might benefit from a more structured environment with stricter academic and social expectations. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Dr. Seaver presenting a carefully constructed case for why Coral needed intervention. Every piece of evidence was subtle but damning. Reports of concerning behavior that could be interpreted as normal teenage development or signs of serious problems, depending on the observer's perspective. As I left the school that afternoon, my hands shook with anger and recognition. This wasn't about Coral's behavior or academic needs. This was Vivian's retaliation for my defiance, executed with the precision of someone who understood exactly how to manipulate educational institutions and professional relationships. The pattern became clear over the following weeks. Coral's piano teacher, Mrs. Archer, a woman who had praised my daughter's musical talent for 3 years, suddenly became critical of her lack of dedication and suggested that perhaps classical piano wasn't the right fit for her abilities. The tennis coach at the country club, where Coral had been taking lessons since childhood, began expressing concerns about her attitude and recommending that she take a break from lessons until she could demonstrate better sportsmanship. Even Coral's part-time job at the local bookstore came under attack. Mrs. Green, the owner who had hired Coral specifically because of her love of literature and her excellent customer service skills, received an anonymous complaint about teenage employees who were inappropriately political in their book recommendations. The complaint mentioned Coral by name, claiming she had been pushing radical feminist literature on impressionable younger customers. Each incident was small enough to seem coincidental, but together they formed a clear pattern of systematic character assassination. Vivian was using her extensive social network and financial influence to poison every aspect of Coral's life outside our home, creating a documentary trail of problematic behavior that would justify whatever intervention she had planned. The most insidious attack came through Coral's social circle. Marcus Green, who had been friends with my daughter since elementary school and had recently begun showing romantic interest, suddenly became distant and awkward around her. When I gently asked Coral about it, she became tearful and confused. "I don't understand what happened, Mom," she said, curled up on her living room couch after a particularly difficult day at school. "Marcus used to walk me to class and sit with me at lunch, but now he barely talks to me. When I asked him what was wrong, he just said his parents thought it would be better if he focused more on his studies and less on social relationships." I held my daughter while she cried, feeling the familiar rage that came with watching Vivian's manipulation destroy someone I loved. Marcus's sudden withdrawal wasn't about academic focus. It was about his parents receiving the same kind of guidance that had driven Tommy Archer away from me 20 years ago. But the most devastating attack was yet to come. 3 weeks after my confrontation with Vivian, I received a call from James's commanding officer requesting a meeting about security concerns related to our family. The implication was clear. Somehow, Vivian had found a way to threaten James's military career through her campaign against our family's independence. As I sat in our kitchen that evening, watching Coral struggle with homework while fighting back tears over her crumbling social life, I realized that Vivian's war wasn't just about controlling our choices. It was about demonstrating that resistance to her authority would result in the systematic destruction of everything we cared about. She wanted me to understand that defying her didn't just affect me. It would destroy my daughter's happiness and my husband's career. The message was clear: surrender completely or watch everyone I loved suffer the consequences of my rebellion. But what Vivian didn't understand was that she'd just made a critical strategic error. By threatening James's military career, she'd moved from family manipulation into the realm of federal crimes. Crimes that a Pentagon chief of strategic operations would have both the authority and the obligation to investigate thoroughly. The escalation began with what appeared to be a generous offer. Vivian called on a Thursday morning, her voice bubbling with manufactured enthusiasm about a wonderful opportunity she'd discovered for Coral. "Darling, I just had lunch with Senator Morrison's wife, and she mentioned the most prestigious summer program at Georgetown University. It's specifically designed for academically gifted young women from prominent families, and she thinks Coral would be perfect for it." I gripped the phone tighter, recognizing the trap before she'd even finished explaining. "What kind of program?" "Leadership development and social awareness training. The girls live on campus for 8 weeks, studying with professors and networking with daughters of senators, congressmen, and Supreme Court justices. It's exactly the kind of experience that will set Coral apart when she applies to elite universities." 8 weeks, an entire summer away from home, surrounded by Vivian's idea of appropriate influences. The timing wasn't coincidental. Summer programs were where wealthy families sent their children to be shaped by institutional pressure rather than parental guidance. "That sounds very intensive," I said carefully. "What's the application process?" "Oh, that's the wonderful part. Senator Morrison's wife has already submitted Coral's application using her academic records and my personal recommendation. Apparently, Coral's recent behavioral concerns actually make her an ideal candidate for their character development track." The casual mention of Coral's manufactured behavioral issues revealed the true purpose. This wasn't an opportunity. It was an intervention designed to break my daughter's spirit and remake her in Vivian's image. "I haven't discussed this with Coral or James yet." "Well, of course you'll want to present it properly," Vivian replied, her tone sharpening. "Though I should mention that the program fee is $18,000, which I'm naturally prepared to cover as Coral's grandmother. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to handle the financial responsibility yourself." The financial manipulation was brutal and precise. James's military salary could theoretically cover the cost, but it would strain our budget significantly. Vivian was forcing me to choose between accepting her control or making a financial sacrifice that would affect our entire family's quality of life. But the real manipulation revealed itself over the following days. Coral came home from school excited about college brochures that had mysteriously appeared in her locker, all from universities that Vivian had mentioned approvingly, all requiring exactly the kind of leadership credentials that the Georgetown program would provide. Look at this one, Mom, Coral said, spreading glossy brochures across our kitchen table. Daddy's alma mater has this amazing international relations program. And look, it says here that they give special consideration to applicants who've completed prestigious summer programs. Her enthusiasm was genuine, but the timing was orchestrated. Someone had been feeding her information designed to make Vivian's summer program seem like the key to her academic future. The manipulation extended beyond academics. Marcus Green, who had been avoiding Coral for weeks, suddenly reappeared with an invitation to his family's country club dance, an event that happened to be scheduled for the same weekend as Coral's best friend Harriet's birthday party. I don't understand why Marcus is asking me now, Coral confided, as we shopped for a dress she couldn't afford to buy without dipping into her college savings. He's been so weird lately, but now he's acting like nothing happened. I understood perfectly. Vivian was creating social situations that forced impossible choices, ensuring that any decision Coral made would result in disappointment or social complications. Accept Marcus's invitation and hurt Harriet, decline and damage the relationship Vivian was trying to control.
The psychological pressure was systematic and relentless. Coral's grades began to slip, not because of academic difficulties, but because the constant social stress was affecting her concentration. Her sleep patterns became erratic as she worried about friendships that were being manipulated without her knowledge. James noticed the changes too. "Coral seems anxious lately," he mentioned one evening as we watched our daughter push food around her plate during dinner. "Has something happened at school?" I wanted to tell him everything about Vivian's financial manipulation, the systematic campaign against Coral's social life, the way our daughter was being psychologically conditioned to accept outside control over her choices. But James was already dealing with his own professional pressures, and Vivian had been careful to keep her attacks subtle enough to seem like normal family dynamics. The breaking point came when Coral's college counselor called to schedule an emergency meeting about her concerning decline in academic performance and social engagement. The counselor mentioned that several teachers had suggested Coral might benefit from professional counseling to address what they were calling adjustment difficulties and authority issues. Professional counseling. Vivian was now trying to have my daughter officially diagnosed with behavioral problems that would justify whatever intervention she had planned. That night, as I listened to Coral crying softly in her bedroom about friendships that were falling apart and opportunities that seemed to be slipping away, I realized that Vivian's campaign had moved beyond manipulation into systematic psychological abuse. She was using every resource at her disposal, financial, social, and institutional, to convince my daughter that her current life was fundamentally flawed and that only Vivian's guidance could provide the stability and success she desperately wanted. The message was clear: surrender to grandmother's control or watch your dreams and relationships crumble under pressure you couldn't understand or resist. But what Vivian still didn't realize was that every manipulative phone call, every orchestrated crisis, every institutional pressure was being carefully documented by a woman married to someone with the authority to investigate federal crimes and the resources to ensure that justice would be swift, thorough, and devastating. The intervention came from an unexpected source. Harriet Archer, Coral's best friend since elementary school, appeared at our front door on a rainy Tuesday evening with tear-stained cheeks and a manila folder clutched against her chest. "Mrs. Knox, I need to tell you something about what's been happening to Coral," she said, her voice shaking with the kind of nervous determination that only teenage girls could muster when they'd finally decided to break ranks with adult authority. I invited her into our living room, noting how she kept glancing toward the windows as if she expected to be watched. The folder in her hands was thick with what appeared to be printed emails and text message screenshots. "My mom has been getting phone calls," Harriet began, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Phone calls about me being a bad influence on Coral. Someone told her that I was encouraging Coral to be disrespectful to adults and that my friendship was making Coral rebellious." My stomach clenched with familiar recognition. What kind of phone calls?
Anonymous ones mostly, but also some from people Mom knows from the country club. They said that if she really cared about my reputation, she'd encourage me to find friends from more stable family situations. Harriet's voice cracked on the last words. Mom started asking me weird questions about whether Coral was happy at home, whether you and Mr. Knox were having marriage problems, whether Coral had been saying negative things about her grandmother. She opened the folder and pulled out a printed email. But then, this came to Mom's work address yesterday. The email was professionally formatted, sent from an account with the name Concerned Community Member. The content was a detailed report about my family's concerning dysfunction, complete with specific examples of Coral's cry-for-help behaviors and suggestions that Harriet's parents might want to protect their daughter from becoming entangled in a family crisis. The level of detail was chilling. The anonymous writer knew about Coral's recent academic struggles, her social difficulties, even private conversations she'd had with friends about feeling confused and overwhelmed. Someone had been systematically gathering intelligence about my daughter's emotional state and using it to isolate her from her support system. Mom was really upset after reading this, Harriet continued. She said maybe we should take a break from hanging out so much, but then she showed it to Dad, and he got really angry. Angry at you?
No, angry at whoever sent it. Dad said it reminded him of something that happened when he was in high school. Harriet's voice dropped to a whisper. He said your mom did the same thing to his family 20 years ago when he was dating you. The room seemed to tilt. Your father is Tommy Archer? Yeah, he told me and Mom about how your grandmother broke up your relationship by threatening his family and spreading rumors about him not being good enough for you. He said he never forgot how cruel she was, and he wasn't going to let her do the same thing to his daughter. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Tommy had married, had a family, built a good life, and now Vivian was targeting his daughter as collateral damage in her war against mine. The generational scope of her manipulation was breathtaking. Dad called some of the other parents, Harriet continued, pulling out more printed emails and text messages. Turns out Marcus's mom got similar messages about Coral being emotionally unstable and from a troubled family situation. So did the parents of most of Coral's friends. She spread the documents across our coffee table like evidence in a criminal investigation. Each email followed the same pattern: anonymous or semi-anonymous reports about my family's dysfunction, specific examples of Coral's problematic behavior, and subtle suggestions that concerned parents might want to protect their own children from our influence. But here's the weird part, Harriet said, her voice gaining strength. Dad started asking questions about who might have access to this kind of detailed information about Coral's school life and social activities. He called Mr. Green, Marcus's dad, and they compared notes. She pulled out a handwritten list. They figured out that someone would need to have contacts inside the school administration, relationships with multiple country club families, and enough social influence to coordinate this kind of campaign. Dad said there's only one person in our community with that level of access and control. Your father thinks it's my mother? Dad doesn't just think it, he's pretty sure, and he's really angry about it. He said what your grandmother did to him was bad enough, but targeting kids crosses a line that he won't tolerate. The front door opened and James walked in, still wearing his Pentagon uniform and carrying his briefcase. He stopped short when he saw Harriet's tear-stained face and the documents spread across our coffee table. Harriet, sweetheart, what's wrong? His voice carried the gentle authority that made him so effective with both military personnel and teenage girls. Mr. Knox, I think someone's been trying to destroy Coral's friendships by lying about your family to all the parents in our social circle. James set down his briefcase and studied the documents with the systematic attention he brought to intelligence briefings. His expression grew darker with each page he reviewed. Harriet, have you shown these to your parents? Dad said to bring them here first. He said if Mrs. Knox's grandmother is really behind this, then you'd know what to do about it better than anyone else.
James looked up from the papers, his eyes meeting mine with an expression I recognized from his most serious military discussions. Shelby, we need to talk. Tonight. The support system I hadn't realized we needed was finally materializing, led by a teenage girl brave enough to document the truth and a father who remembered being victimized by the same woman 20 years earlier. Vivian's web of manipulation was about to be exposed by the very community she'd tried to turn against us. The confrontation with Vivian happened on neutral ground, the country club's private dining room that she'd reserved for what she called a family reconciliation lunch. She'd been uncharacteristically quiet for 3 weeks following my conversation with James and the evidence gathering that Harriet's father had initiated among the other parents. Shelby, darling, I think we've both let emotions cloud our judgment lately, Vivian began, her voice carrying the practiced contrition of someone accustomed to smoothing over social difficulties. This tension between us is affecting Coral, and that's the last thing either of us want. She looked impeccable as always, designer suit, perfect makeup, every hair in place. But there was something brittle in her composure, a tension around her eyes that suggested she knew her position was becoming untenable. I've been thinking about our conversation regarding Coral's education, and perhaps I was too enthusiastic in my suggestions. You're her mother, and of course your wishes should be the primary consideration. The concession was so unexpected that I almost choked on my water. In 38 years, I'd never heard Vivian admit to being wrong about anything, much less back down from a position she'd taken regarding family decisions. I appreciate that, Mom, I said carefully, unsure where this was leading. In fact, I'd like to make amends by doing something special for Coral's junior prom. I know how important these milestones are for young women, and I want her day to be absolutely perfect. She slid an elegant folder across the table, embossed with the logo of Rosewood Bridal, the most exclusive dress shop in the city. Inside were photographs of stunning gowns, each more beautiful and expensive than anything Coral and I had been considering. I've spoken with Helena at Rosewood, and she's agreed to give Coral a private consultation. Any dress she chooses, regardless of price, will be my gift to her. I want my granddaughter to feel like a princess. The gesture was so generous, so perfectly calibrated to appeal to both my maternal desires and Coral's teenage dreams, that I found myself genuinely moved despite my wariness. This was the grandmother I'd always wanted Coral to have, supportive, loving, invested in her happiness. That's incredibly generous, Mom. Coral will be thrilled. There's more, Vivian continued, her smile becoming more genuine. I've also arranged for professional hair and makeup, a limousine for her and Marcus, and dinner reservations at Les Bernard. I want this to be a night she'll remember forever. The offer was breathtaking in its scope and expense. Prom packages like this typically cost thousands of dollars, more than James and I would have been comfortable spending on a single evening, no matter how special. Are you sure about this? It's a lot of money, and we don't want Coral to develop unrealistic expectations about... Shelby, Vivian interrupted gently, I'm 72 years old. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and Coral is my only granddaughter. If I can't spoil her on prom night, when can I? Over the following days, Vivian's transformation seemed complete and genuine. She called Coral directly to discuss dress options, listened enthusiastically to her excitement about Marcus asking her to prom, even offered to coordinate transportation with the other parents so the group of friends could arrive together. The appointment at Rosewood Bridal felt like a fairy tale. Coral tried on gown after gown, each more stunning than the last, while Vivian and I sat in plush chairs drinking champagne and watching our daughter discover her own beauty. When Coral emerged in a midnight blue silk gown that made her look like a young Grace Kelly, both Vivian and I had tears in our eyes. That's the one, Vivian whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She looks absolutely radiant. The dress required minor alterations, a slight adjustment to the bodice, hemming for Coral's height, and Vivian insisted on paying for rush service to ensure everything would be perfect. She even arranged for matching shoes, jewelry, and a vintage clutch that had belonged to her own mother. "I want her to carry something that connects her to our family's history," she explained as she showed us the antique beaded purse. "Something that reminds her she's part of a legacy of strong, beautiful women." For 2 weeks, it felt like we'd finally achieved the family harmony I'd always dreamed of. Vivian called regularly to check on prom preparations, offered practical advice about photography and timing, even suggested having a small family gathering before prom so we could all see Coral in her dress. James remained cautiously optimistic, but watchful. "I hope this is genuine," he said one evening as we discussed the dramatic change in his mother-in-law's behavior. But leopards don't usually change their spots this dramatically without some external pressure. I wanted to believe that our confrontation had finally forced Vivian to recognize the damage her controlling behavior was causing. Maybe the evidence Tommy Archer had helped gather, the realization that other parents were talking about her manipulation tactics, had shocked her into genuine self-reflection. The night before prom, as Coral excitedly tried on her complete outfit one final time, spinning in front of her bedroom mirror with pure joy, I felt a deep satisfaction that we'd navigated through the family crisis to reach this moment of peace. Vivian had not only backed down from her campaign of control, she'd actively contributed to making Coral's dreams come true. The prom dress was perfect, the plans were flawless, and for the first time in months, my daughter was radiating the kind of happiness that made all the earlier struggles worthwhile. Maybe, I thought, as I watched Coral practice her prom night poses, families really could change and heal when the stakes became clear enough. It would be the last peaceful thought I'd have for a very long time. The call came at 8:47 a.m. on prom day, just as Coral was finishing her breakfast and bubbling with excitement about the evening ahead. Vivian's voice carried an urgency that immediately set my nerves on edge.
Shelby, darling, I need you to bring Coral's dress to my house this morning. Helena from Rosewood just called. Apparently there's a small issue with one of the seams that needs immediate attention. I frowned, remembering how perfect the dress had looked during our final fitting 3 days earlier. What kind of issue? The dress seemed fine when we picked it up. Something about the stress points around the bodice. You know how delicate silk can be, especially with all the beadwork. Helena said it's a quick fix, but it needs to be done by someone who understands the construction. She's coming to my house at 10 to handle it personally. The explanation sounded reasonable, but something in Vivian's tone felt off. Too rushed, too insistent. Still, with prom just 8 hours away, any potential dress emergency needed immediate attention. I can bring it over around 9:30, I said. Should Coral come with me? Oh, no need to interrupt her morning routine. You know how nervous teenage girls get on big days like this. Just bring the dress and I'll handle everything with Helena. Coral can focus on relaxing and preparing herself mentally for tonight. After hanging up, I found Coral in her bedroom, carefully organizing her jewelry and accessories for the evening. Her face glowed with anticipation, and I couldn't bear the thought of adding any stress to her perfect day with talk of dress problems. "Grandma wants me to drop your dress off for a quick alteration," I told her. "Just a minor adjustment to make sure everything's perfect tonight." "Is something wrong with it?" Coral's voice carried a note of panic that made my heart clench. "Nothing serious, just a precautionary check. Helena wants to make sure the seam work is secure before tonight." Coral relaxed, returning to her preparations with renewed excitement. As I carefully lifted the garment bag containing her dream dress, she called out, "Tell Grandma I said thank you again for everything. This is going to be the best night ever." The drive to Vivian's house took 15 minutes through the tree-lined streets of her exclusive neighborhood. Her colonial mansion looked imposing as always, its perfectly manicured grounds and pristine facade reflecting the wealth and status she'd spent decades accumulating. I parked in the circular driveway and carried the dress to the front door, noting that Helena's car wasn't visible anywhere. When Vivian answered the door, she was dressed in a flowing cast-on that seemed unusually casual for someone expecting a professional seamstress. "Perfect timing," she said, taking the garment bag from my hands with what seemed like excessive eagerness.
Helena just called to say she's running a few minutes late, but she'll be here soon. Should I wait for her? I'd like to understand exactly what needs to be fixed. No, that's not necessary, Vivian replied quickly. You know how these fashion professionals are, very particular about their work environment. Helena prefers to work without distractions, and honestly, watching alterations can be quite tedious. She hung the dress bag in her front hall closet with careful precision. Besides, I'm sure you have 100 things to do to prepare for tonight. Hair appointments, photography arrangements, all those details that make these events special. Something in her demeanor felt rehearsed, as if she'd planned this conversation in advance. But with prom just hours away, I didn't have time to analyze every nuance of family interaction. What time should I pick up the dress? Helena estimates she'll be finished by 2 o'clock. I'll call you when it's ready, and you can come collect it then. That gives Coral plenty of time for her hair and makeup appointments before the evening festivities begin. As I drove home, a nagging uneasiness settled in my stomach. Something about the morning's interaction felt orchestrated, but I couldn't identify what specifically was bothering me. Vivian had been helpful and accommodating, the seamstress appointment made perfect sense, and everything was proceeding according to plan. Back home, I found Coral on the phone with Harriet, discussing final details about hairstyling and transportation. Her happiness was infectious, and I forced myself to set aside any lingering concerns about the morning's dress emergency. At 11:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Helena arrived, working on dress now, everything proceeding smoothly. We'll call when finished. At 1:15, another text, alterations taking longer than expected, very detailed work. We'll definitely be ready by 3 p.m. At 2:45, the call I'd been expecting finally came. But instead of Vivian's voice, I heard sobbing, raw, desperate crying that made my blood freeze.
Mom? Coral's voice was barely recognizable through her tears. Mom, something terrible happened. Grandma says there was an accident with my dress. She says Helena ruined it, and there's no time to fix it, and prom is tonight, and I don't have anything to wear, and… Slow down, sweetheart. What exactly happened? Grandma says Helena was working on the seam and the fabric tore, and now there's a huge rip right down the front, and the beadwork is all messed up. And she says Helena is crying and apologizing, but the dress is completely destroyed. And the line went dead. When I called back immediately, Vivian answered with a voice full of manufactured distress. Shelby, I'm so sorry. This is a disaster. Helena feels terrible, but accidents happen when you're working with such delicate fabrics. The dress is completely unwearable. We're going to have to figure out an alternative solution very quickly. As I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door, a cold certainty settled over me. There had been no seamstress appointment. There had been no accidental damage during alterations. This was Vivian's endgame, the final, devastating move in her campaign to reassert control over our family, and I was about to walk directly into her trap. I found Coral sitting on Vivian's pristine white sofa, still wearing her pajamas at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, her face streaked with mascara and tears. In her lap lay the remains of what had been the most beautiful dress either of us had ever seen. The midnight blue silk had been systematically destroyed, not torn accidentally during alterations, but deliberately cut with what appeared to be sharp scissors. The intricate beadwork hung in tatters, thousands of tiny crystals scattered across the Persian rug like fallen stars. The bodice had been slashed in clean, purposeful lines that no seamstress would ever make during routine repairs. "Mom," Coral whispered when she saw me, her voice hoarse from crying. "Look what happened to my dress." I knelt beside my daughter, examining the destruction with growing horror and rage. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculated act of cruelty designed to devastate a 17-year-old girl on what should have been one of the most special nights of her life. "Grandma says Helena was trying to fix a loose seam and her scissors slipped," Coral continued, holding up a section of silk that had been cut so cleanly it could have been done with a scalpel. "But Mom, look at these cuts. How could scissors slip this many times?" Vivian stood in the doorway, wearing an expression of perfect maternal concern that made my stomach turn.
She'd changed from her casual caftan into an elegant black dress, as if she'd been preparing for a performance. I'm afraid Helena was quite distraught when she realized what had happened, Vivian said, her voice carrying exactly the right note of sympathetic regret. She left immediately after offering to pay for the damage, though of course money can't replace such a special dress with so little time remaining. Where is Helena now? I asked, fighting to keep my voice level. She had to leave for another appointment. She was nearly in tears, poor thing. These professional seamstresses take such pride in their work. When accidents happen, they feel personally responsible. I looked around the room, noting details that confirmed my growing suspicion. There were no sewing supplies visible, no temporary alteration station that would have been necessary for the kind of work Helena supposedly came to do. The coffee table held only Vivian's usual magazines and a crystal bowl of perfectly arranged flowers. Coral, sweetheart, could you go wash your face and gather your things? We need to get home and figure out our next steps. But Mom, what are we going to do? Prom is in 5 hours, and every dress shop will be closed, and I don't have anything else, and Marcus will be here, and we'll figure it out, I said firmly, pulling my daughter into a hug while maintaining eye contact with Vivian over her shoulder. I promise you will go to prom tonight. As Cora left the room to collect her purse and shoes, Vivian stepped closer, her mask of concern slipping slightly to reveal something calculating underneath. Of course, there are a few boutiques in the city that stay open late for emergencies, she said, her tone suggesting she'd already considered this possibility. Though I'm afraid anything available this late in the day will be quite expensive and probably not nearly as special as what Coral had been planning to wear. Or, she continued, moving to the window to check something outside, there's always the dress I wore to my debutante ball. It's been preserved in my cedar closet for 50 years, and while it's not exactly contemporary, it would certainly be appropriate for a young lady attending her first formal event.
The offer was delivered with perfect timing and exactly the right note of reluctant helpfulness, but I recognized it for what it was. The final move in a chess game Vivian had been playing since the moment she decided to destroy Coral's independence. The debutante dress would be old-fashioned, probably unflattering on a modern 17-year-old, and definitely not what any teenager would choose to wear to prom. But more importantly, accepting it would mean acknowledging Vivian as our savior, the grandmother who stepped in to rescue Coral from disaster. That's very kind, Mom, but I think we'll explore other options first. Well, of course, Vivian replied, though her eyes flashed with irritation at my refusal to accept her orchestrated salvation. Though I should mention that tomorrow is Sunday, and most formal wear shops will be closed. If tonight's options don't work out. She left the threat hanging in the air. Tomorrow would be too late. If I couldn't find a suitable dress today, Coral would miss prom entirely, and Vivian would be there to comfort her granddaughter while pointing out that this disaster could have been avoided if only I had accepted appropriate guidance from the beginning. When Coral returned to the living room, her eyes red but determined, she took one last look at the destroyed dress and asked the question that had been haunting me since I first saw the damage. Grandma, when Helena was cutting the fabric, didn't you hear her? Wouldn't there have been sounds if she was struggling with the alterations? For just a moment, Vivian's composure cracked. Her eyes darted toward the kitchen, where I now noticed a pair of fabric scissors lying on the counter, scissors that were stained with tiny blue silk fibers. I was in my study making phone calls. Darling, she replied, but her voice carried a note of defensiveness that hadn't been there before. Sometimes when professionals are working, they prefer privacy to concentrate on their craft. As we gathered the remains of Coral's dream dress and prepared to leave, I made a mental note of every detail in the room. The scissors on the counter, the absence of any sewing equipment, the fact that Vivian had been dressed for an event rather than casually supervising alterations. Most importantly, I noted the small security camera mounted discreetly in the corner of the room, a camera that would have recorded everything that happened to my daughter's dress. Vivian thought she'd delivered a crushing blow that would force our family back under her control. Instead, she just provided James with all the evidence he would need to destroy her completely. The drive home from Vivian's house took place in tense silence, with Coral clutching the ruined dress like a wounded animal and me gripping the steering wheel, so tightly my knuckles had turned white. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I had made 3 critical decisions that would change everything. First, Coral would attend prom tonight in a dress that made her feel beautiful, no matter what it took to make that happen. Second, I would document every detail of what had just occurred while the evidence was fresh. Third, James would learn exactly what his mother-in-law had done, and he would have all the ammunition he needed to respond with the full authority of his Pentagon position. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Coral asked as we sat in the car, neither of us ready to go inside and face the reality of our situation. "First, we're going to call Harriet and see if her mother can recommend any emergency dress options. Then we're going to call every formal wear shop within 50 miles. And if that doesn't work, we're going to get creative." What I didn't tell my daughter was that I was also going to call my husband and set in motion a response that would ensure Vivian never manipulated anyone in our family ever again. Inside the house, I sent Coral upstairs to shower and start her hair and makeup routine as planned, promising her that I would handle the dress crisis. The moment she was out of earshot, I called James's direct Pentagon line. "Strategic Operations, Chief Knox speaking. James, I need you to come home immediately. It's about Vivian, and it's urgent." The tone in my voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation because he didn't ask questions. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Are you and Coral safe?" "We're safe, but James, she's gone too far this time. Much too far." While waiting for James to arrive, I methodically photographed the destroyed dress from every angle, documenting the clean scissor cuts that proved deliberate destruction rather than accidental damage. I printed out the photos and organized them alongside the financial documents from the manila envelope, the recorded phone conversations, and Harriet's evidence of the social manipulation campaign.
When James walked through our front door still wearing his dress uniform, his expression shifted from concern to cold fury as I explained what had happened at Vivian's house. But it was when I showed him the photographs of Coral's dress that something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "She did this deliberately," he said, studying the clean cuts in the fabric. "These aren't accident marks, they're methodical destruction." "James, there's more." I handed him the complete file I'd been building since discovering the manila envelope. "She's been committing federal crimes to fund her manipulation campaign. Stolen vower, veteran benefit fraud, systematic harassment of military families, including ours." He spent 20 minutes reviewing every document, every recording, every piece of evidence in complete silence. When he finally looked up, his expression was that of a military strategist who had just identified a high-value target. "Shelby, I need you to understand something. What you've documented here isn't just family drama. It's a pattern of federal crimes that fall directly under military jurisdiction. The veteran benefit fraud alone carries a potential sentence of 20 years in federal prison." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your mother has been stealing money designated for disabled veterans who actually served their country and sacrificed for our freedom. She's been using that stolen money to psychologically abuse a military family, my family. This isn't a matter for family counseling or local law enforcement." James pulled out his secure cell phone and began scrolling through his contacts. "I'm going to make some calls. By tomorrow morning, every relevant federal agency will have copies of this evidence. The FBI, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Inspector General's office, everyone who has jurisdiction over crimes against military personnel and veteran benefits. Is that enough to stop her?" "Shelby, when federal investigators start auditing someone's financial records for veteran benefit fraud, they don't just look at the specific complaints. They examine everything: tax returns, bank accounts, property records, investment portfolios. If your mother has been hiding other illegal activities, and I suspect she has, this investigation will expose all of it." He stood and straightened his uniform jacket with the precise movements of someone preparing for battle. "But first, we're going to handle the immediate crisis.
Coral is going to prom tonight, and she's going to look absolutely beautiful. How? Every formal wear shop will be closed by now, and the few that might be open won't have anything in her size. James smiled with the confident expression he wore when implementing strategies that others couldn't see coming. Do you remember my colleague, Colonel Patricia Seaver? Her daughter got married last month, and her wedding party had 12 bridesmaids. Patricia mentioned that they ordered extra dresses in various sizes as backups. He was already dialing another number. Patricia, it's James Knox. I need a significant favor, and I need it in the next 2 hours. As James arranged emergency dress procurement through his military network, I realized that Vivian had made a critical miscalculation. She'd assumed that destroying Coral's dress would leave us helpless and dependent on her false generosity. Instead, she'd given us the perfect excuse to demonstrate that a real family, one built on love and mutual support rather than manipulation and control, could overcome any crisis through cooperation and genuine care for each other. More importantly, she'd committed her crimes against someone with direct access to the most powerful investigative resources in the federal government. By tomorrow morning, Vivian's decades of manipulation and fraud would be under federal investigation. By tomorrow evening, her life as she knew it would be over forever. But tonight, our daughter would attend prom in a beautiful dress, surrounded by friends who truly cared about her happiness, free from the toxic influence that had shadowed our family for too long. Colonel Patricia Seaver arrived at our house at 4:30 p.m. with a garment bag containing 3 different formal gowns, each more stunning than anything we could have found in local stores. Her efficiency and genuine concern for Coral's crisis reminded me why James chose to work with people of such caliber. Military families care for each other, she said simply. As Coral tried on a gorgeous emerald green dress that fit her perfectly, word surprise, absolutely beautiful. While Coral was upstairs getting ready with newfound excitement, James made a series of phone calls that would systematically dismantle Vivian's life with the precision of a military operation.
Agent Morrison, this is Chief James Knox, Pentagon Strategic Operations. I have evidence of systematic veteran benefit fraud that requires immediate federal investigation. He spoke with the calm authority of someone accustomed to handling national security matters. The perpetrator has stolen approximately $180,000 in disability payments using a deceased veteran's identity. The FBI agent on the other end apparently asked for details because James continued with clinical precision. The subject has been using fraudulently obtained funds to finance harassment campaigns against military families, including psychological abuse of minor children. I'm transmitting comprehensive documentation now. While that call was proceeding, James sent me a text. Call Marcus Green's father. Tell him to document everything his family has experienced. Federal investigators will want witness statements from all affected military families. The second call was to the Department of Veterans Affairs Inspector General. Inspector Walsh, this is Chief Knox. I have evidence of identity theft targeting veteran benefits that requires your immediate attention. The fraud includes forged signatures on disability claims and false caregiver documentation spanning 5 years. By 5 p.m., James had initiated contact with 7 different federal agencies, each with jurisdiction over different aspects of Vivian's criminal enterprise. The FBI would handle the identity theft and fraud charges. The VA Inspector General would investigate the stolen benefits. The IRS would examine tax evasion related to unreported fraudulent income. Even the Postal Service investigators were involved, since using mail to commit federal fraud carried additional penalties. James, isn't this excessive? I asked, as I watched him methodically destroy my mother's life with the efficiency of someone conducting a military strike. Shelby, your mother committed crimes against veterans who served our country. She stole money designated for men and women who sacrificed their health and sometimes their lives for our freedom, then used that money to psychologically abuse their fellow military families. His voice carried the cold fury of someone whose core values had been violated. This isn't excessive, this is justice. The third phase of his operation involved our extended community. James called Tommy Archer, Marcus Green's father, and 3 other military families in our area who had been affected by Vivian's manipulation campaigns. Gentlemen, this is Chief Knox. I'm organizing a coordinated response to the harassment your families have experienced. Federal investigators will need detailed statements from each of you documenting the manipulation attempts, false allegations, and social sabotage you've witnessed. What impressed me most was how quickly these military fathers responded to James's call for cooperation. Within an hour, we had commitments from 6 families to provide comprehensive witness statements about Vivian's systematic campaign of psychological warfare against military personnel and their children. At 6 p.m., as Coral was putting the finishing touches on her makeup and preparing for the magical evening we'd almost lost, James made his most devastating call. Senator Morrison, this is Chief Knox from Pentagon's Strategic Operations. I need to inform you about a serious situation involving your wife's country club associate, Vivian Knox. There was a pause as James listened to the senator's response. Yes, sir, she's my mother-in-law, and she's been using your wife's name and social connections to facilitate federal crimes against military families. The conversation that followed was brief but decisive. Senator Morrison, who served on the Armed Services Committee and took veteran affairs very seriously, was apparently outraged to learn that his wife's social circle included someone who was stealing from disabled veterans. Thank you, Senator. Yes, I'll ensure your office receives copies of all documentation for your committee's review. When James hung up, he turned to me with the satisfied expression of someone who had just completed a successful mission. Senator Morrison is calling an emergency session of the Veterans Affairs Subcommittee for Monday morning. Your mother's crimes will be investigated at the highest levels of government. The final call was the most personal and, in many ways, the most satisfying. James dialed Vivian's number and put the phone on speaker so I could hear both sides of the conversation. Vivian, this is James. I understand there was an incident with Coral's prom dress today. Oh, James, it was such a terrible accident. Poor Helena was so upset about damaging such a beautiful gown. But these things happen with delicate fabrics, and—
Vivian, James interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect from generals and senators. I've reviewed the photographic evidence of the dress damage. Those weren't accidental cuts, they were deliberate destruction. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Vivian to realize that her performance wasn't working on someone trained to analyze strategic deception. More importantly, James continued, I've spent the afternoon reviewing your financial records with federal investigators. The veteran benefit fraud, the identity theft, the systematic harassment of military families, all of it is now under federal investigation. Another pause, longer this time, filled with the sound of Vivian's world crumbling. By Monday morning, you'll be facing federal charges that carry a minimum sentence of 15 years in prison. The FBI will be executing search warrants on your property, your bank accounts, and your electronic communications. When Vivian finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. James, surely we can discuss this as family. We stopped being family the moment you decided to steal from veterans and abuse my daughter. Enjoy your weekend, Vivian. It will be your last as a free woman. Coral looked absolutely radiant as she descended our staircase at 7 p.m., the emerald green dress flowing around her like liquid starlight. Marcus stood in our foyer wearing a perfectly fitted tuxedo, his face lighting up with genuine admiration as he saw his date for the first time. You look incredible, he said, offering her a corsage of white orchids that complemented her dress perfectly. I mean, you always look beautiful, but tonight, wow. As I watched them pose for photos in our living room, their faces glowing with happiness and excitement, I felt a deep satisfaction that we'd saved this moment from Vivian's attempt to destroy it. Whatever happened next, Coral would have this perfect memory of her junior prom. James stood beside me, still in his dress uniform, occasionally checking his phone as federal agencies responded to the evidence he'd submitted. Agent Morrison confirms they've initiated surveillance, he murmured quietly. Vivian is being monitored until the warrants are executed Monday morning.
At 7:30, just as Marcus and Coral were preparing to leave for their dinner reservations, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Vivian's number, and James nodded for me to answer while he activated the recording app. "Shelby, darling, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier today." Vivian's voice carried a forced cheerfulness that couldn't quite mask an underlying desperation. "I realize I may have seemed insensitive about Coral's dress situation. Perhaps we could arrange something special to make up for the disappointment?" "That's very thoughtful, Mom, but we've already resolved the dress issue. Coral looks beautiful tonight." "Oh, wonderful! I'm so relieved. You know how important these milestone events are for young women." There was a pause, then Vivian continued with what sounded like rehearsed casualness. "I was wondering if you and James might like to join me for brunch tomorrow after church. There are some family matters I'd like to discuss." The invitation was clearly an attempt to gauge whether James had followed through on his threats from their earlier conversation. Vivian was fishing for information about the federal investigation while maintaining plausible deniability about her own crimes. "I'm not sure about tomorrow, Mom. James has some work obligations that might interfere with social plans." "Work obligations? On a Sunday? Surely the Pentagon doesn't require weekend duties for administrative personnel." The dismissive comment about James's administrative role revealed both Vivian's ignorance about military hierarchy and her continued inability to show respect for his service. James raised an eyebrow at the slight, but remained focused on his phone, where federal agents were apparently providing real-time updates about their investigation. "Actually, Mom, some military duties transcend normal business hours, especially when they involve national security matters." "National security?" Vivian's voice sharpened with what might have been genuine concern or calculated curiosity. "That sounds quite serious. I hope it's nothing that affects our family's security clearances or social standing." The question confirmed what James had suspected. Vivian was worried that her crimes might have been discovered and reported to federal authorities. Her mention of security clearances was particularly telling, since civilian families didn't typically worry about such matters unless they knew they'd committed acts that could trigger government scrutiny. "Some investigations require immediate attention when they involved crimes against military personnel," James said, taking the phone from me, "particularly when those crimes include veteran benefit fraud and identity theft." The silence that followed was profound. When Vivian finally spoke, her voice had lost all pretense of casual family conversation. "James, if someone has made accusations about my financial affairs, I hope you understand that there could be perfectly innocent explanations for any apparent irregularities." "Vivian, federal investigators don't rely on accusations. They rely on documentary evidence, financial records, and witness testimony, all of which are quite comprehensive in this particular case. Surely, as a family, we could resolve any misunderstandings without involving outside authorities. These government investigations can be so disruptive to everyone involved, including innocent family members." The attempt at emotional manipulation, threatening to drag Coral and me into her legal troubles, backfired completely with someone trained to recognize strategic deception. "The only family members who will be affected by this investigation are those who committed federal crimes," James replied coldly. "Innocent people have nothing to fear from federal law enforcement." At that moment, Coral and Marcus returned to the living room, ready to leave for their magical evening. Coral's face was flushed with excitement, and she practically bounced on her toes as she kissed my cheek goodbye. "Thank you for fixing everything, Mom. You and Dad always know how to make things work out." As we watched them drive away in Marcus's father's carefully maintained sedan, James's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly, then looked up with grim satisfaction. Vivian just made a crucial mistake. She's been calling other families involved in the investigation, apparently trying to coordinate stories or discourage cooperation with federal agents. Is that illegal? Obstruction of justice and witness tampering are federal felonies, James replied, forwarding the message to his federal contacts. She just added another 5 to 10 years to her potential sentence. Through our front window, I could see neighbors beginning to gather in small groups, their conversations punctuated by glances toward the end of our street, where unmarked federal vehicles had been positioned since late afternoon. Word was spreading through our military community that something significant was happening, something that would change the power dynamics that had controlled our social circle for decades. By tomorrow morning, everyone would know that the woman who had terrorized military families for years was facing federal prosecution for crimes against the very veterans whose service she had pretended to respect. The first domino fell at 6:47 a.m. Sunday morning when FBI agents executed simultaneous search warrants on Vivian's house, her country club office, and 3 separate bank safety deposit boxes. The operation was coordinated with military precision, involving 12 federal agents and forensic accountants who had been working through the night to trace the full scope of her financial crimes. James received real-time updates on his secure phone as we sat in our kitchen drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. "They've found additional fraudulent accounts," he reported, scrolling through encrypted messages. "Apparently, your mother has been running veteran benefit scams in 3 different states using multiple deceased veterans' identities." The scope of criminality was staggering. What we'd thought was a single case of fraud involving my father's benefits turned out to be a sophisticated operation that had been stealing from military families for over a decade. Vivian had been systematically targeting widows of deceased veterans, offering to help them navigate benefit applications, then creating fraudulent accounts that diverted payments to her own financial network. The forensic accountants estimate she's stolen close to $800,000 from veteran families, James continued, his voice tight with controlled fury. She's been using that money to fund her lifestyle of manipulation and control, buying influence with school administrators, country club officials, and local politicians. At 8:15 a.m., my phone began ringing with calls from other military wives in our community. Word of the FBI raids had spread quickly through the network of families that Vivian had been terrorizing for years, and the response was a mixture of relief and outrage. "Shelby, is it true?" asked Patricia Green, Marcus's mother. "Did the FBI really arrest your mother for stealing from veterans?" "She hasn't been arrested yet, but she's under federal investigation for multiple crimes involving veteran benefit fraud." "Thank God," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how many families she's hurt with her manipulation campaigns. My husband served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and she had the audacity to question our patriotism because we wouldn't let her control Marcus's relationship with Coral." Similar conversations played out throughout the morning as the military community began sharing stories of Vivian's systematic abuse that they'd previously been too intimidated to discuss openly. The wife of a retired Navy SEAL revealed that Vivian had tried to have their son expelled from school by falsely claiming he threatened other students. A Marine Corps family shared documentation of how she'd sabotaged their daughter's college applications because the girl had befriended someone Vivian considered inappropriate. By 10 a.m., James had compiled witness statements from 16 military families documenting a pattern of harassment, manipulation, and social sabotage that painted Vivian as a domestic terrorist targeting the very people who had served our country. The most damning revelation came from Senator Morrison's office at 11:30 a.m. His chief of staff called James directly with information that would destroy Vivian's reputation permanently. "Chief Knox, the senator asked me to inform you that our preliminary investigation has uncovered evidence that Mrs. Knox has been using the senator's name and office letterhead to facilitate her fraudulent activities. She's been sending official-looking documents to veteran families claiming government authorization for her benefit assistance services." The implications were staggering. Vivian hadn't just been stealing from veterans, she'd been impersonating federal officials and using forged government documents to gain access to military families' personal information. These were federal crimes that carried mandatory minimum sentences and would likely result in decades of imprisonment. Furthermore, the chief of staff continued, Mrs. Knox has been claiming to represent a nonprofit organization called Veterans Family Support Services that doesn't actually exist. She's been soliciting donations from wealthy country club members under false pretenses, telling them the money was going to help military families while actually funding her personal manipulation campaigns. At noon, as church services were ending across our community, James's phone rang with the call we'd been expecting. FBI agent Morrison had coordinated with local law enforcement to arrest Vivian as she left Sunday service at the prestigious Episcopal church where she'd been a prominent member for 25 years. She's been taken into federal custody, Agent Morrison reported. The arrest was made in the church parking lot in front of approximately 50 witnesses, including several prominent community members who had been funding her fake charity organization. The public nature of the arrest was particularly devastating for someone who had built her identity around social status and community respect. Being handcuffed and placed in a federal vehicle while her fellow church members watched would destroy the carefully maintained image she'd spent decades creating. What happens next? I asked as James relayed the information. Federal arraignment Monday morning, where she'll be formally charged with 19 separate felonies, including identity theft, veteran benefit fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and impersonating federal officials. The prosecutor is recommending no bail due to flight risk and the international scope of some of her financial crimes. At 2 p.m., the local news stations began broadcasting footage of Vivian's arrest, identifying her as the leader of a sophisticated fraud ring that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from veteran families. The story would run on every major network by evening, ensuring that her crimes became public knowledge throughout the region. As I watched my mother's perp walk on the evening news, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled, her face frozen in shock and humiliation, I felt a profound sense of justice finally being served. The woman who had spent decades terrorizing military families while pretending to support veterans was now facing the full consequences of her crimes against the very people she claimed to honor. Her reign of terror was officially over. The most devastating blow to Vivian's carefully constructed world came not from federal agents or prosecutors, but from the people who had loved and trusted her for decades. The revelation of her crimes didn't just destroy her freedom, it obliterated every meaningful relationship she'd spent 72 years building. Robert Morrison, the senator's wife and Vivian's closest friend for 30 years, called a press conference Monday afternoon to publicly denounce their association. Standing behind a podium at the country club where they'd shared countless lunches and charity events, she delivered a statement that would be replayed on news channels across the region. The Morrison family is horrified to learn that someone we considered a dear friend has been systematically stealing from the brave men and women who served our country, she declared, her voice shaking with genuine emotion. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and have turned over all communications and financial records related to Mrs. Knox's fraudulent charity activities. The press conference was devastating precisely because of Robert's social standing. As the wife of a senator who championed veteran causes, her public rejection of Vivian carried moral authority that would influence every other prominent family in their social circle. By Tuesday morning, the Rosewood Country Club's board of directors had voted unanimously to revoke Vivian's membership, a decision that was communicated through a formal letter delivered to her jail cell. The same institution where she'd held court for decades, wielding social influence like a weapon, had erased her existence with bureaucratic efficiency. The Episcopal Church followed suit on Wednesday, with Reverend Thomas delivering a carefully worded statement about their commitment to supporting veteran families and their inability to associate with individuals who had betrayed that sacred trust. Vivian's name was quietly removed from all donor recognition plaques and memorial dedications she'd funded over the years. But the most personally devastating rejection came from her own social circle. The women who had deferred to her judgment, sought her approval, and feared her disapproval for decades began sharing their own stories of manipulation and control. At coffee shops and salon appointments throughout the city, Former friends revealed instances where Vivian had sabotaged their relationships, undermined their children's opportunities, or used private information against them. Margaret Seaver, who had been Vivian's bridge partner for 15 years, gave an interview to the local newspaper that summarized the community's collective realization. We all knew Vivian could be controlling, but we attributed it to her strong personality and family traditions. Now we understand that what we called strength was actually cruelty, and what we thought was family loyalty was systematic abuse. The financial crimes had provided the legal framework for Vivian's destruction, but it was the personal betrayals that ensured her complete social annihilation. Every charity board resigned her, every social club expelled her, every friend publicly distanced themselves from her actions. Even her longtime housekeeper, Maria, who had worked for the family for 12 years, quit via a letter that was leaked to the press. Her statement revealed that she'd witnessed Vivian destroying personal property, eavesdropping on private conversations, and keeping detailed files on families throughout the community. I stayed because I needed the job, Maria wrote, but I could never respect someone who treated other people's children like pawns in her personal games. By the end of the week, Vivian Knox had been transformed from the most influential woman in our community to a pariah whose name had become synonymous with betrayal of everything our military families held sacred. The woman who had controlled others through fear of social rejection was now experiencing the ultimate rejection herself, complete and permanent exile from the very society she'd spent her life trying to dominate. The federal courthouse was packed on the morning of Vivian's sentencing, 3 months after her arrest. Representatives from 16 military families sat in the gallery, many wearing their dress uniforms or gold star pins, creating a visual reminder of exactly who had been victimized by her crimes. Judge Patricia Hammond, herself a veteran who had served in Iraq, reviewed the pre-sentencing report with the gravity appropriate for crimes against those who had served their country. Mrs. Knox, in my 30 years on the federal bench, I have rarely encountered such a systematic and callous abuse of our nation's veterans and their families. Vivian stood before the judge wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her usual designer clothes, her carefully maintained appearance replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who had lost everything. The transformation was stark, from the commanding presence who had controlled our community's social hierarchy to a broken woman facing the consequences of decades of cruelty. Your crimes were not committed out of desperation or need, Judge Hammond continued, consulting the thick file that documented the full scope of Vivian's fraud. The evidence shows you stole $847,000 from veteran benefit programs while maintaining a lifestyle of luxury and using that stolen money to psychologically abuse military families, including children.
The final amount was staggering. Federal investigators had uncovered fraudulent accounts in 4 states, involving the identities of 23 deceased veterans whose families had trusted Vivian to help them navigate government benefits. She had betrayed that trust to fund a decade-long campaign of manipulation and control. The psychological evaluation submitted by the defense suggests you genuinely believed your actions were justified by your desire to maintain family traditions and social standards. This court finds that explanation not mitigating, but deeply disturbing. James sat beside me in the gallery, his dress uniform bearing the ribbons and medals that represented actual service to country, a stark contrast to the woman who had stolen from those who earned such honors through sacrifice and dedication. Mrs. Knox, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, followed by 15 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $847,000, plus accrued interest and penalties. The sentence was devastating and appropriate. At 72 years old, Vivian would likely die in prison, her remaining years spent in the kind of institutional control she had imposed on others for decades. As federal marshals led her away, she turned once toward the gallery where our family sat. For a moment, I saw not the manipulative tyrant who had terrorized military families, but a broken old woman who had destroyed her own life through her inability to respect other people's freedom and dignity. 6 months later, Coral graduated as valedictorian,
delivered a speech about resilience and family strength to a proud audience that included Marcus, now her boyfriend of over a year. The scholarship she received to Georgetown, earned through her own merit, not through manipulation or fraud, was presented by Senator Morrison himself, who had become a family friend through our shared commitment to veteran advocacy. Standing in the audience that day, watching my daughter shine with genuine confidence, and surrounded by people who loved her for who she truly was, I realized that Vivian's greatest failure wasn't her crimes against veterans or her manipulation of military families. Her greatest failure was missing the opportunity to witness the incredible woman her granddaughter had become, not through control and coercion, but through love, support, and the freedom to develop her own strength and character. Justice hadn't just been served through the federal courts. It had been served through the simple triumph of watching authentic love overcome systematic manipulation and seeing our family thrive in the freedom that Vivian had tried so desperately to destroy.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.